For decades, fans believed their love was written in the stars, a perfect harmony between two of music's most soulful voices. Carly Simon and James Taylor weren't just a couple. They were a cultural moment. But behind the romantic duets and dreamy stage smiles, something darker always lingered. At 81, Carly Simon is finally pulling back the curtain, revealing the truth about a marriage that shaped her art and haunted her heart. In a series of raw confessions, she says what we all suspected, but never heard out loud. This isn't just about love, it's about what it costs to survive it. When Carly met James. It was the summer of 1971, and Los Angeles was buzzing with new music, strange magic, and endless possibilities. The Troubadour, a tiny but legendary club on Santa Monica Boulevard, had become a sacred space for emerging voices. That night, Carly Simon walked in, tall, wide-eyed, full of mischief and melody. Across the room was James Taylor, fresh off the wave of success from Sweet Baby James, with a quiet intensity in his eyes. Their meeting wasn't staged or strategic. It was, as Carly later described, like turning a corner and bumping into someone you already knew. The spark was immediate. They talked for hours. No games, no masks, just two songwriters who understood the weight of words and the cost of honesty. At the time, both Carly and James were climbing fast. She was already catching fire with hits like "That's the Way I've Always Heard It Should Be." He was becoming the face of the sensitive singer-songwriter era. But with each other, fame didn't matter. They connected through vulnerability. They saw through the public image. Carly once said, "With James, I didn't have to pretend. He already knew the broken parts." Within a year, they were married. The wedding was simple, held in Carly's apartment in New York City. There was no red carpet, no paparazzi, just a piano, a few friends, and vows whispered like a secret. James wore jeans, Carly wore flowers in her hair, and for a moment, it felt like the music had written them into each other's verses. Fans saw it as a union of legends, a folk rock fairy tale. But behind the glow of flashbulbs and gold records, this was something deeply human. Two artists, both raised by complicated families, trying to rewrite their own story. It was like finding home, Carly would later write. But even fairy tales need foundations. And for Carly and James, theirs was built not just on love, but on the shared language of music. The creative bond. In the early years of their marriage, music was everything. It wasn't just what they did, it was who they were. Carly and James didn't just live together. They breathed in chords and verses and breathed out harmonies. Their voices blended like a conversation only they could have. Their duet, Mockingbird, released in 1974, was a standout moment. Playful, sharp, and full of electricity, the song was an instant hit. But it wasn't just a performance, it was a glimpse into their real chemistry. When they sang together, they weren't acting. They were flirting, arguing, laughing, all through melody. "That song was our entire relationship in 3 minutes," Carly joked in an interview. They wrote side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes tossing lyrics across the room like love notes. Music helped them survive the intense pressure of fame. It gave them a way to say the things they couldn't always speak aloud. "Music was how we apologized, how we made peace," Carly once said. "There were days we didn't talk at all. Then he'd play something on the guitar, and I knew exactly what he meant." Fans idolized them. Critics praised their work. The music world called them a dream team. But Carly and James were still just two people, navigating a marriage under the heaviest spotlight. With each new hit, the public fell more in love with their love. But behind the curtain, life was getting more complex. As they toured and recorded, cracks started to form. The very thing that united them, their art, began to blur the line between their professional and personal lives. "Sometimes I didn't know if he was singing to me or at me," Carly admitted. "It was hard to separate the songs from the truth." And when the tours ended and the applause faded, they returned home, not to rest, but to raise a family under the watchful eyes of the world. Building a family in the spotlight. By the mid-1970s, Carly Simon and James Taylor were more than music royalty. They were parents. Their daughter, Sally, was born in 1974, and their son, Ben, came 3 years later. For a while, their lives felt like a dream stitched together from lullabies, beach walks, and bedtime guitar sessions. But the dream was fragile. Fame doesn't make family easier. It only adds pressure. They're home on. Martha's Vineyard was meant to be a refuge, a big white house with wind in the curtains and music in the air. James wrote in one room, Carly in another. But between diaper changes and recording sessions, something quieter began to grow. Distance. Raising 2 children under the weight of relentless attention took its toll. Paparazzi would stalk them even at the beach. Magazines speculated on their parenting, their relationship, their careers. And while they tried to shield Sally and Ben from it all, the spotlight found its way through every crack. Carly loved motherhood. She described it as the one role that didn't feel like performing. She read to the kids every night, made up songs on the spot, baked muffins while singing nursery rhymes. But she was often doing it alone. James, though loving in his way, was slipping further into addiction and emotional withdrawal. There were whole days when I'd look around and realize it was just me and the kids, Carly later said. He'd be there, but not really there. And yet, there were moments of magic. Family jam sessions in the living room, Sally dancing to her dad's records, Ben plunking out little melodies on the piano. Carly clung to those memories, even as the cracks deepened. "We were a family built on song," she said, "but sometimes the music wasn't enough." And as their children grew, so did the silence between Carly and James, until even their harmonies couldn't hold them together. The shadows behind the shine. To the world, they were the golden couple. But inside their home, a different story played out. One of emotional distance, long absences, and growing resentment. James Taylor's battle with heroin addiction was no secret to Carly. It haunted every corner of their life, from late-night fights to empty dinner chairs. He would disappear, not always physically, but emotionally, Carly later wrote, and when he was gone, I felt like I was floating without an anchor. Carly had always dealt with anxiety, but during this time, it became unbearable. She often found herself crying in closets, unsure of what was worse, the chaos or the waiting. Friends would visit and sense the tension, but no one knew the full extent. Carly never wanted to destroy his image. She was protecting him, and, in a way, still loving him. She tried everything: therapy, long talks, songwriting, but James was drifting into his own world, one she couldn't follow. "I kept trying to fix us with music," she admitted. But love songs can't detox a soul. The kids noticed too. They were young, but not blind. Ben once asked why Daddy always seemed sad. Carly didn't have an answer. The man she married, the one who played guitar in the morning light, was slowly becoming a ghost in their home. And yet, there were no explosive fights, no cruel words, just exhaustion, just silence. And eventually, silence gave way to distance, a slow and painful unraveling that neither could stop. A marriage slowly fading. By the early 80s, the magic was mostly memory. Carly and James were still legally married, still sharing parenting duties, still smiling for photos. But the intimacy was gone. "We were two people playing roles," Carly said, "like actors in a scene we didn't rehearse for." There was no affair that shattered everything, no sudden betrayal. Instead, their marriage ended the way some storms do. After years of quiet rain, nights passed without words. Trips were taken alone. Even their duets lost something unspoken. The music didn't sparkle anymore. It just existed. Carly remembered lying in bed beside James and feeling lonelier than if she were sleeping alone. "I missed him while he was next to me," she said. And that was the loneliest feeling in the world. The public had no idea. They still performed together from time to time, smiling through the songs. But behind the curtain, their lives had already taken separate paths. In 1983, their divorce was finalized. There were no headlines, no dramatic interviews, just paperwork and a quiet sigh from both. Still, Carly never spoke ill of him. She never dragged him through the mud. "James was the love of my life," she confessed years later. But sometimes, love isn't enough. Not when the pain speaks louder. The end of the marriage wasn't the end of her feelings. It was just the end of their chapter. But after the final page turned, Carly was left staring at the margins, navigating the void, the heartbreak, and the life that came after him. Life after divorce. When the divorce papers were signed in 1983, it wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of a dream Carly Simon had spent over a decade building. She wasn't just losing James Taylor, the man. She was losing the rhythm of a shared life, the comfort of routine, the idea that their love would always somehow survive the chaos. The years after were complicated. Carly tried to move forward, but the emotional residue lingered. In interviews, she admitted that nothing quite filled the space James left behind. "There's a difference between being alone and being lonely," she once said. "And I was both, sometimes at the same time." James, always more private, retreated deeper into his music and healing. He was focused on sobriety, recovery, and rebuilding. Carly respected that, but she also felt forgotten. The communication between them became less frequent, then non-existent. They raised Sally and Ben separately, coordinating holidays and school decisions with formality, not closeness. "We were polite," Carly admitted, "but never warm again." Still, life had to move on. Carly continued to make music, to tour, to write. She remarried to writer Jim Hart, and for a time she thought she'd found stability again. But even that chapter ended in heartbreak when Hart came out as gay years into their marriage. Through it all, Carly remained vulnerable but resilient. She poured her sorrow into songs. She mothered fiercely. She kept going. But as she moved forward, certain wounds refused to close, especially the ones left open by silence. Unspoken things and lingering pain. For Carly, the hardest part wasn't the divorce. It was everything that came after. The silence, the unanswered calls, the way James slowly pulled away, not just from her, but from their children too. In her memoir, she revealed how difficult it was to explain to Sally and Ben why their father was so emotionally distant. One of the most heartbreaking stories Carly told involved confronting one of James's mistresses during the final years of their marriage. "It wasn't out of jealousy," she said, "but a desperate need for clarity. I didn't want to blame her. I just wanted to know if he had already left me in his heart." But it was the silence that hurt most. Over the years, James barely acknowledged their shared past publicly. He rarely spoke about Carly, and even less about their children. "I used to wait for some kind of recognition," she confessed. "A thank you, even. Something." What lingered wasn't anger. It was a quiet sadness, a disappointment that two people who once loved each other so deeply couldn't even be friends. Carly admitted in a rare interview, "I kept hoping we'd find our way back, not as lovers, but as parents. But that never happened." And with so much left unsaid, Carly did what she had always done best. She turned her pain into poetry and gave it a voice. The truth she held back. For years, Carly Simon danced around the question everyone wanted to ask. Did she still love James Taylor? At 81, she finally gave the answer most people suspected, but never heard from her lips. "Yes," she said, "a part of me always will. Not in a way that wants him back, but in a way that will never stop remembering." This wasn't about longing, it was about history, shared roots, the kind of emotional imprint that can't be undone, no matter how many years pass. Carly confessed that she still sometimes dreamed about James. Not the man he is now, but the man he was when they first met. Quiet, broken, beautiful. She also admitted something even more surprising. Many of her songs over the years, even after the divorce, were still about him. "There are pieces of James in almost everything I've written," she said. "Even when I tried to write about someone else, he would find his way in." There was no bitterness in her voice, only tremors of vulnerability. It wasn't about what could have been, it was about what once was. "Some loves don't fade," she said. "They just stop growing." And though their love stopped evolving, it never truly disappeared, especially not in the music they created and left behind. The music they left behind. Even after the marriage ended, the songs remained. Carly and James never officially reunited, but their music lived on as a reflection of their relationship, tender, stormy, raw. Fans continued to dissect lyrics, hunting for clues, listening for pain tucked between the verses. Carly's "Haunting" and "We're So Close" dripped with heartbreak. James's "Something in the Way She Moves" and "Don't Let Me Be Lonely Tonight" took on new layers of meaning after their split. It was as if their records held the conversations they could never quite finish in real life. "You write what you can't say," Carly once said. And with James, there was always so much I couldn't say face to face. The public latched onto their story like a real-life ballad. Carly often joked that fans treated her and James like characters from a novel they refused to close. "People ask me all the time, 'Do you think he still listens to your music?' she said. "I honestly don't know, but I listen to his. I always have." Their records became a time capsule, a love letter, a breakup text, and a whispered apology, all in one. And though the voices in those songs aged, the feelings never did. But the people most affected by that music, the ones who lived between its lines, were their children. The children in the middle, Sally and Ben Taylor, were born into music, but also into heartbreak. Being the children of two famous singer-songwriters meant growing up between tour buses and recording studios, but also between tension and unresolved pain. They inherited talent, yes, but they also inherited emotional baggage. Carly did everything she could to give them stability, but it wasn't always enough. Ben, in particular, struggled with his identity, battling feelings of abandonment. His relationship with James became strained over the years, and at times non-existent. Carly once revealed that Ben stopped speaking to James for several years. "It broke my heart to watch them drift apart," she said. "I saw myself in that silence." Sally, more grounded and expressive, remained close to Carly and tried to keep peace within the family. She publicly praised her mother's strength, her humor, and her commitment to making their childhood as magical as it could be, despite the shadows. For both children, music became a refuge. Ben developed his own unique sound, while Sally used songwriting as a form of healing. "We speak through music," Carly said. "It's the one place where we still all connect." And while that connection kept them tethered, one question lingered in the minds of fans and family alike. Why didn't Carly and James ever reunite? Why they never reunited? Fans hoped. Promoters tried. Journalists speculated. But a Carly Simon and James Taylor reunion never came. Not for a benefit concert, not for a children's milestone, not even for nostalgia's sake. Behind closed doors, the reasons were layer-haired. Carly said it best in an interview. "James was someone I loved very deeply, but we no longer know each other." Over time, their lives had become parallel tracks, close enough to feel the vibrations, but never intersecting again. Many believed pride played a role. Others pointed to pain that hadn't healed. Carly admitted she had reached out a few times, for birthdays, for big moments, but the silence on the other end made her stop trying. "You can't force reconciliation," she said. "You can only offer your heart and hope." James, meanwhile, rarely mentioned Carly publicly. His interviews were guarded. His lyrics occasionally hinted at regret, but there was never confirmation. Carly didn't take it personally. "It's his way," she said. "He processes inward. I write songs and cry in interviews. He builds walls." Fans speculated about a performance together, maybe on Martha's Vineyard, maybe a one-time duet, but it never came. "I think people wanted a fairy tale ending," Carly noted, "but some stories aren't meant to be rewritten." Still, even without a reunion on stage, Carly made sure the real story was finally told, in her own voice, in her own words. The memoir that said it all. In 2015, Carly published Boys in the Trees, a memoir that peeled back decades of silence. It wasn't just about James, but he was undeniably one of its most powerful threads. She didn't hold back. She wrote about her father's emotional coldness, her lifelong anxiety, and the devastating beauty of her relationship with James Taylor. The pages weren't polished. They were raw. Each chapter read like a journal entry she was finally brave enough to publish. Critics praised her honesty. Some said it was too revealing. Carly disagreed. It wasn't about revenge. It was about release, she explained. "I had carried those memories for too long. I needed to set them down." She described the early magic, how James's voice could make her knees shake, and then the decline, the addiction, the growing distance. "Loving James was like loving the ocean," she wrote, "beautiful, vast, and always just a little out of reach." The memoir wasn't a takedown. It was a love letter drenched in pain. Readers saw the depth of what was lost and why it still mattered. Carly gave the world a map of her heart, and James had his own page, written with tears and truth. But Carly's life didn't end with that heartbreak. She lived, loved, and learned more, shaping her legacy through each twist in the road. Other loves, other lessons. James Taylor wasn't Carly Simon's only love, but he was the one who left the deepest imprint. After their divorce, Carly tried again, first with brief flings, then with another marriage. She dated singer Cat Stevens, had a whirlwind connection with Warren Beatty, who may or may not have inspired You're So Vain, and eventually fell in love with writer Jim Hart. With Jim, she found something rare: stability. For nearly 20 years, they shared a life of laughter, creativity, and quiet companionship. But that chapter, too, ended in heartbreak, when Jim came out as gay. Carly didn't respond with anger. She responded with understanding. "He had to be who he really was," she said. "And I had to let him go with love. Through every love," she wrote. "Through every goodbye," she sang. Her relationships weren't just romances, they were lessons. Lessons about trust, loss, forgiveness, and holding on to yourself when the world spins too fast. "James was my fire," she said. "Jim was my calm." And somewhere between them, she found her balance. But even with all those chapters written, one part of her story still carried a bittersweet glow. And at 81, she was finally ready to face it head-on. She admits now. It took decades, but Carly Simon finally said what so many of us suspected all along. At 81, in a quiet interview surrounded by books and golden sunlight, she looked up and said, "I never stopped writing songs for him." She was speaking, of course, about James. The love was no longer romantic, no longer even active, but it lived in her music, in the space he once occupied in her heart. She admitted that the emotional impact of their breakup was deeper than she ever let on. For years, she performed, smiled, remarried, all while carrying a weight that never fully lifted. "I think the damage was bigger than anyone saw," she said softly. "I held a lot in, especially for the kids, but I never really stopped wondering what might have been." She wasn't blaming him. She wasn't begging for closure. She was simply telling the truth. "We loved each other fiercely," she said, "but we couldn't figure out how to stay whole together." The most surprising confession? That she still dreams about him. Not every night, not in sadness, but in a kind of wistful memory. "We were magic once," she whispered. "And you don't forget magic." And that magic, broken, beautiful, and unfinished, lives on in more than just memory. It echoes in the songs they left behind, and the legacy they unknowingly built. A legacy of melody and memory. Carly Simon doesn't chase the spotlight these days. She lives quietly, surrounded by music, old letters, and family photos. But her story, with all its brilliance and ache, still plays softly in the background of pop culture. She and James may never have reconciled, but their connection is impossible to erase. It lives in the lyrics, in the interviews, in the way fans speak their names together, like a sacred duet from a lost era. Through Sally and Ben, their legacy continues. Through Boys in the Trees, it's finally understood. And through every re-release, every streamed ballad, every tearful sing-along to Mockingbird, their story comes alive again. "I think our love outlived us," Carly once said. "It stopped growing, but it didn't disappear. It just became something else." And maybe that's the truth behind the most unforgettable relationships, not the ones that last forever, but the ones that change us forever. Their chapter closed long ago, but their harmony, however broken, still echoes. And in her own words, "We were magic once. That kind of magic doesn't just disappear." Carly Simon never stopped singing, but now she's finally been heard. Her truth isn't bitter, it's brave. And in revealing the cracks behind the music, she's given us something more lasting than any love story: honesty. The songs may fade, but the truth, that's what echoes forever.